So how do I know when to feed my baby? This is a great question, but luckily babies will tell us when they need to nurse. I think one of the biggest worries with the breastfeeding relationship is that where bottles, you it's pretty cut and dried, right? Like you feed the baby every 3 to 4 hours, you mix this much formula, we can see how much the baby's getting. Easy, easy peasy, right? So with breastfeeding, a lot of people worry, I don't know how much my baby's getting. How do I know when to feed my baby? All these things. There's a lot of pressure to know if the baby's growing correctly, but we're going to talk about all these things. So how do I know when to feed my baby? You're going to want to look for early feeding cues. Your baby will let you know. So it's important to remember that crying is actually a late feeding cue. By the time a newborn is crying because he's hungry, they almost become too disorganized to nurse well. It's not like a newborn is thinking like, oh, if I could, I'm screaming and crying, if I could just nurse, I'll feel better and then I'll calm down. You'll find that if you wait for crying as a late feeding cue and go to nurse your baby, oftentimes it almost looks like rejection. They're pushing away, they're screaming, you're getting frustrated, the baby's getting frustrated. That's because by the time a baby gets to the crying stage, they're actually quite hungry. So in the beginning, it's important to look for very subtle feeding cues. So that being said, the more time we can spend with our baby, holding the baby, skin to skin, laying in, rooming in, I always say it's everyone else's job. The mom's job is to feed the baby, and everyone else's job is to take care of mom. So if we can spend time in bed with baby, skin to skin, you're going to start to see these early feeding cues. And one of the earliest feeding cues is actually they look like they're still sleeping. And a baby's REM sleep, you'll notice that their eyes start to move under their eyelids. That's actually an early feeding cue. So that's when you can kind of start to, if the baby's been put down and you're not holding the baby, unwrapping the baby. A really great trick instead of undressing your baby all the time with all the skin to skin is just diaper on, burrito wrap, swaddle, put the baby down, let them sleep. When they start doing the REM sleep, moving their eyes, early waking cues, you can just unwrap the blanket, put them skin to skin, and they'll slowly wake up and want to start nursing. Another feeding cue is rooting, and you've probably seen babies, they open their mouths and they turn and they try to latch on to anything that's holding them. That's a really early feeding cue. That's when we want to nurse the baby. They'll start bringing their hands to their mouth and chewing or sucking on their mouths. That's a bigger feeding cue. We're getting to where they're going to start to get really disorganized and start crying soon. So once the baby's hands are to mouth, we want to start nursing. We want to start with a calm baby. So if you're bringing your baby to your breast and the baby's screaming like the one here, we want to just take a deep breath, soothe baby, shh, 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 shh. By the way, that noise mimics what the sound was like in your uterus. So that can really calm a baby. Waiting till they're calmed down to begin feeding. So this just goes to show you, like, if we can nurse as often as possible with those early feeding cues, we're not going to have the screaming baby. Obviously, life gets in the way of that. We're in the car, we're at the doctor's appointment, we're doing whatever. You're going to have times when that just happens, and we really want to try to calm the baby down first. Moms, dads, you guys take a deep breath. The calmer you are, baby will calm down, skin to skin. And once again, the importance of skin to skin. The best way to start a breastfeeding session right is with the baby skin to skin for the first few weeks. So this is a very new postpartum mom, and I can tell because she's wearing the mesh underwear. And that's definitely a newborn baby. With all these slides, I tried to find lots of great pictures, but sometimes the pictures of what not to do works just as well. And we're going to get into how to hold a newborn baby for nursing soon. So this picture is good in that the baby's latch looks good. The baby's pressed up against the breast. His chin is tucked into the breast. But you see how the baby's tummy is kind of pointing up toward the sky? If she were to take that right hand of hers and turn the baby's hips in, so her tummy is to his tummy and his hips were flipped in, that would actually be a much better hold. But we'll get into that in a minute. So I wanted to quick touch base with some a reality check, if you will, of breastfeeding. So I believe sometimes we incorrectly assume what a newborn should look like or do. You know, you hear, well, newborns sleep all the time. Well, that sounds great. You'll quickly realize that's not what it looks like at all. And that even getting time to take a shower is a pretty precious thing. So I think that a lot of times when first-time moms sit down and they're nursing and all of a sudden it feels like all they're doing is nursing, we get the incorrect assumption that we might be doing it wrong. This, maybe the baby's not getting enough because all I'm doing is nursing. What's happening? I should have more time. Why is the baby always wanting to eat? And then you think that something's wrong instead of that's actually what it looks like. I've mentioned earlier on that humans have the same type of milk as what's called a carrier species. And a carrier species is an animal that has their young with them at all times. So we have animals like kangaroos, for instance, that they literally carry their babies with them. And those babies basically nurse 24/7. And so the milk of a kangaroo is very high in carbohydrates and simple sugars and lower in fats and proteins. Then on the other hand, you have cache species where they cache their young, like wolves, and they have to go hunt, and they might be gone for 4 or 5 hours. And so their milk has to be designed to keep those little pups satisfied for several hours. So that type of milk is much higher in fats and proteins. So I believe that kind of shows us that we are supposed to have our babies on us or near us nursing quite often because of the type of milk that we make. So many moms are unaware of the investment in time and then falsely believe they're doing it wrong. It shouldn't be taking this long. So what does a 24-hour day look like in the first, let's say, 6 weeks of nursing? And don't worry, if I were to draw a graph of kind of the investment of time that nursing takes, it would start pretty high for the first 6 weeks. And then that curve would go way down. And the longer you nurse, the easier it's going to get. So the first 6 weeks is really an investment. Versus formula feeding, whether you're formula feeding at day 6 or 6 months, you're going to be investing the same amount of time every feed to get a bottle ready, to sterilize bottles, and so on. And it usually takes longer the first few weeks to get a full feeding in. And then your baby's going to get really efficient, and you're going to get really efficient, and the baby can go longer without nursing. Or, by your 4th baby, they might only get to have a 5-minute snack before you go pick up the other kids from school. And that's okay because then they will nurse later. And so there's a lot of investment in time in the beginning, but that's short-lived. So you just hang in there. It's going to get a lot easier. Okay. In a 24-hour day, you're going to want to aim for at least 10 to 12 nursing sessions. If you are nursing less than 10 times in 24 hours, we're probably going to see some weight gain issues or milk supply issues. We really want to see at least 10 to 12 nursings a day. And we're going to talk about what that looks like, but on average, you're going to nurse about every 2 hours for some of the day. And then they're going to go through a period of time where it's called a cluster feed. And it might seem like 2, 3, 4 hours where they're just wanting to nurse constantly. And a lot of moms think, oh gosh, I'm not making enough milk. They're super hungry. What's wrong? That's totally normal. It's called a cluster feed. And then hopefully shortly after your cluster feed, you'll have a very long stretch. So in any given 24 hours, it's totally okay for a baby to sleep 3 to 5 hours once in that 24 hours, if that makes sense. And then the baby will probably nurse a little extra after they wake up from that long session, and then go every 2 hours or so, do their cluster feed, and start it all over again. Early on, in the first couple weeks, it's going to typically take you 40 to 60 minutes to complete a full feeding session. And then we count sessions from the start of one to the start of the next. So say you start nursing at 8, you finish at 9, baby's going to actually want to start eating again at 10 because it's been 2 hours from the start of the first session. Now, I do want to get on my soapbox here. And if you have been given the book about sleep schedules or anything like that, I want you to throw it in the garbage. Schedules just aren't for newborn babies. There's a time and a place where we can get a baby on a good feeding schedule, a good sleeping schedule, but it's certainly not in the first 6 weeks. Breastfed babies need to be fed on demand. Like we just talked about, we have a carrier type species milk. They don't store very much of it. It's high in carbohydrates. They need it constantly. We need to feed on demand, and that includes throughout the night. We need to hit 10 to 12 feedings, but more is okay. We need to really watch what the baby is doing. We don't want to hold a baby off if they're looking hungry. We don't want to force feed a baby if they're not hungry. We want to watch for what they're doing at the breast, and we're going to talk lots about that in a little bit. Are they drinking? Are they swallowing? Are they showing fullness? Are they showing feeding cues? We never want to miss a feeding cue. And then, like we just covered, we're going to nurse 2 to 3 hours on average, except for 1 3 to 5 hour stretch a day. Hopefully it's at night, but typically the first couple weeks, the babies will have the days and nights mixed up. And 1 long cluster feed. Going back to talking about the golden hour and the first 24 hours, we really want to protect the first week. I would go as far to say is protect the first month, but most couples end up having visitors and going out and doing things, but really protecting the first week is so important to help establish that breastfeeding relationship with your baby. So that means we want to limit as many visitors as possible. Mom supports the baby and everyone else supports mom. I find this super common. Just be careful of the relatives that you invite. We want to invite helpful relatives. We want to invite the relatives that are there to clean your house, to cook you meals, to go do errands. We don't want the relatives that are here to bask in the glory of the new baby and get served by mom. I've seen that happen a lot. We don't want also to have grandma be holding the baby constantly and mom doing all the chores. There's a couple reasons for this. Postpartum moms really need their rest. And the more rest they can do in the first couple weeks, the faster their recovery will be. We don't want a 6-week recovery because mom's been doing too much. The second thing that I want to warn about is that every mom will notice grandma comes and mom, you might be upset because every time you hold the baby, he wants to nurse and he's fussy and you don't know what you're doing wrong because the baby's just not sleeping, and your mom comes or other grandma comes and she holds that baby and that baby goes right to sleep for 3 hours. Which you think is great, kind of, but you also feel jealous and worried that you're not doing it right. What is grandma doing different? That kind of thing. It's actually a very biological thing that's happening. So babies absolutely don't sleep as much with mom because they smell their milk, which is exactly what should be happening. The baby wants to demand more and more milk. And in those first 3 weeks, that's when the baby is building up your milk supply. So the more often you can nurse, the better. And when grandma or someone else holds the baby and they just sleep, they're actually sleeping through feeds and feeding cues. And what happens is when the baby is not around mom, who smells like milk, the baby actually shuts down and thinks, well, there's no milk around, there's no reason for me to be up. So while it's great to have a break and certainly hand off the baby to grandma so you can go take a shower, or if you just need that break, go for it. But we don't want to rely on that. And we want to realize the mechanisms behind what's actually happening with that. I'm a big advocate of spending the first several days in your bed at home. Not only do you get the rest, you're going to bleed less, you're going to recover faster, but if your baby's in bed with you, you're going to pick up on a lot more feeding cues. It's going to be a lot easier to do skin to skin, and breastfeeding is going to get off to a really great start. Because honestly, if you have visitors over and you're on the couch and you're fully dressed and your baby's fully dressed and Uncle Bob's over there, you're not going to strip down and start nursing. So we tend to put off feeds. By then the baby's hungry or she slept through a feeding. We don't want that pattern to start. After the first several days in bed, we can move to the couch. We still stay at home. But your job is to learn how to breastfeed, and partner's job, mom's job, grandpa's job is to support you, do the errands, clean the house, take care of the other kids so that you can focus on breastfeeding.